Welcome to another edition of Rethinking Freedom. Truly excited to be with each and every one of you, whether you're listening to us live on the radio, or if you are watching us on YouTube, or perhaps you've downloaded us on any of the podcast panels. Thank you so much for joining us today. As usual, I am your host, Aya Fubara Eneli. And here at Rethinking Freedom, this is not just a show, it's a movement. The goal is to get us to really think about what freedom means to us and what we are going to do to bring about freedom for each and every one of us, not just some. And so today we have a hot topic, one that is certainly raging in the state of Texas, where I am based, for those of you paying attention to politics, that the Department of Education is under some serious strains right now. So with me today, I have two educators who are going to share their viewpoints on the fight for public education, vouchers, politics, and the future of our schools. And really what we're talking about is the future of our youth, the future of our nation, how it is that we are able to continue to advance and to meet our needs, and what that means for each and every one of us, whether you have children in school or not, because obviously educators provide the workforce for the future. So with me today, we have John Melvin, and he's going to be introducing himself, telling us a little bit about his background. And we also have Jennifer Lee, who's also was also a candidate for House Representative here in Texas as well. Welcome to the show, John. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, Aya.
So we'll start with you, John. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what your background is in this area of education.
Well, I came into education about 20 years ago. Best daddy job ever. So when I met it with my wife, and she had 3 kids and have a couple of our own. And on top of that, it was a great job for a daddy. My mother has been an educator for all my life, retired about 10 years ago. And I worked over at Shoemaker for about 9 years with their engineering and physics, teaching those courses, which was wonderful. I got to meet a lot of great kids and see their potential and their ability to think. And it was great that way. For 5 years, I was over at the Career Center. Actually got into the what I've been trained on, which is horticulture, agriculture. And for the last 5 years, I've been working down at Harmony Science Academy down in Pflugerville, teaching engineering and currently doing 6th grade science, which was quite a stretch.
Quite a stretch going from high school back down to 6th graders. I wonder what that looks like, what that feels like.
So I've always been terrified of the middle schools. I no, thank you. I don't know how they did. I always, gave them great credit. And now the needs of the school, I needed to be there, so I'm there.
So your career started in a public school district.
Yes.
And now the school that you currently teach at, how is
charter
that
school.
classified? It's a charter school. Okay.
Right.
All right. And how about you, Jennifer?
Well, I graduated from Baylor with my degree in Child and Family Studies, and always said that I would never become a teacher because why? And so I kind of...
You don't want all our badass... Oh, I'm sorry. Can I say that word? You don't want all our amazing kids?
Those sweet angel babies. That was not my initial calling. But after I graduated and I was trying to figure out, what do I do with this degree? I really enjoyed studying child development and learning kind of a small aspect of social work and just working with families. And eventually I spent 3 years working as a resident advocate at the domestic violence shelter in Waco. And I did that at night. And then I would get off work at 6 o'clock in the morning and still was not making enough to make all, my ends meet. And so I ended up also substituting for Waco ISD during the day. So I'd get off 6 o'clock in the morning, go shower, change, and then go straight to an elementary school. where I got to spend the day with kindergartners, pre-K kiddos. Those were my favorites. And what I realized, and what a lot of people around me realized when they would hear me talk about it, is that, yeah, you're supposed to be a teacher. Stop playing in our face. You're supposed to be a teacher. And so I ended up going back, getting that alternate certification, and I became a teacher at Harker Heights High School. I applied to be a kindergarten teacher with KISD and ended up at Harker Heights High School. I didn't even realize that was a possibility until that principal called me, and I said, sure, why not? And so I ended up being there 11 years in hopes that one day that kindergarten position would happen. And it did not. I taught the child development, the education, the nutrition classes, and I sponsored our future educators group because I love growing future teachers and inspiring that passion in others. Someone had to call it out of me, so I called it out of a whole bunch of other people as well. And then after that, I said, you know what, I want a little bit more of a challenge. And so I became a 4th and 5th grade math interventionist at a Title I dual lingual campus. And so I did that for 2 years and then decided I want another challenge, and I ran for office. And so I just ran for state representative for House District 55 because honestly, we need a teacher in the House.
We need a teacher in the House. So actually tell us what is currently going on with public education and education as a whole in the state of Texas from your perspective.
What I see happening is this complete destruction, the continued destruction of the belief in public education, the belief in school teachers. You know, you used to say, oh, I'm a teacher, and everyone would say, oh, thank you so much, and be so grateful. And now it's, oh, so do you teach that DEI, that CRT? Do you teach that, trans stuff? Do you teach? It's immediately, oh, you must be doing horrible things in our schools. And that wasn't the case for years. And now there's so much mistrust sown into the image of public educators that it's sickening and it's disheartening, and it's turning good teachers away because it's becoming more and more challenging to be a good teacher.
How about you, John? What do you see as the state of education in Texas at this time? And how has that changed?
I'd start out with a little story my mother told me when she first started teaching back in 1960. Her mentor teacher told her, oh, Jane, I wish you'd been here 20 years ago when I first started because it was so much better. We didn't have all this paperwork. And as my mother went through her career, it just got worse and worse and worse as far as more and more paperwork. I have a problem with the lack of the ability to teach passions as a teacher. The curriculum has become very structured, very much teach this, teach this, teach this. So they're really looking for someone with knowledge of the subject to be able to fill in the gaps. But there's no passion. Like my teachers would teach about things they really knew and loved because they'd be fans of them. So I would have a diversity of thought, a diversity of passions from my different teachers, which would be different from the diversity of thought and passions of a teacher in another school district or just another teacher in the same building, which I thought was really relevant and really good as far as my education went, knowing now that we're squeezing that out of the system. And that's a bad thing. As a teacher of engineering, high school engineering, I'm not a trained engineer at all. One of the big things we wanted to look for was all the thoughts, all the way we could bring together different ideas and different experiences to solving a problem. We're making kind of a narrow thing of here's the knowledge you need to know, and we're not worried about the rest. And although they have educators kind of with a lot of say in what that narrow band of knowledge is, we're still we're pruning a whole bunch of life, a bunch of needed understandings off of that with the way we're currently testing. And what gets measured gets done, unfortunately. So we're working more and more on getting those students to do what this narrow band is and perfecting teaching that narrow band, and especially the students that are right on the cusp of getting a better a slightly higher understanding and score on those tests. So we focus a lot on those. The ones who are super achievers, we don't, okay, we got you here, do some other project. The ones who are way below, we'll keep you going along, but the middle ones get the attention. And unfortunately, by just focusing on that, we talk data-driven teaching and that sort of thing. So we're looking at those scores, finding where those bubble kids are. The kids are right on the cusp, and just pounding on them to try to get them to just get a little bit higher on this narrow band of education. So that is my overall view of how we're doing things and how I wish we were doing things better. Like maybe 50%, the narrow band. Make sure we hit a lot of things that we find are most valuable. And then 50% passion, things that why do I want to teach science? I love science. So that's what I'd prefer to see. And I think we'd all benefit from that, especially the diversity of people, just teachers and the students. That'd be better than trying to lock us into, this is what you need to know. And if you know that, you're good. Here's your diploma.
So Jennifer, you talked about the impact that some of these changes are having on teachers and how teachers are perceived and how it's impacting morale. But I'm wondering from both of you, and John, if you would take this question first, what do you see as the impact on the students themselves? How are students responding to the way we're currently delivering education?
Well, as an educator, I always look at myself and try to do better by the students. So the way my students respond to the education, I respond to my students and how they are achieving what they need. We're doing better at having students look beyond it used to be 4 things that kids wanted to be: a firefighter, a policeman, a teacher, or a doctor. Those were the 4 big ones. So now the students do seem to have more opportunities of what they want to look for, what they would like to be. I worry that I'm getting away from your question.
No, we're still having this conversation, because what I'm seeing as a parent of 5 children, ages 15 now through 25, and just seeing the changes, I don't feel my children are as engaged. I remember one of my daughters, when she took an English course at Temple College in Central Texas, and she came home and she was so excited. And she says, "Mom," this is a child who's an avid reader, great writer, all of that. But she says, "Mom, I knew I was struggling with some pieces, just things that I didn't quite understand. And I didn't feel like in high school the teachers were able to help me really connect." She was a straight A student, but she didn't feel confident in the material that she was getting. She knew how to pass the test and how to excel on the test, but she felt there was a disconnect. And this teacher that she had at Temple College, and I don't recall the teacher's name because I would have loved to shout out the teacher, she said just brought back the joy and the passion, and was making these connections. And she said, "I'm loving the class and I'm learning, Mom. I'm really learning." What I see with my youngest children, who also happen to be boys, is they are bored out of their minds. And so learning is about going through just like, okay, this is what I need to do because I'm supposed to graduate from high school, as opposed to really what I think education should be about, which is teaching us to be lifelong learners, teaching us to be curious, teaching us to explore and to really expand our minds and to think critically, as opposed to, okay, this is what the test is going to be on. Let me regurgitate this information get this GPA so I can go to college and I can do the same thing. And even when I talk to my friends who are college professors, they are talking about students not really being able to engage with material, not wanting to read, not wanting to think critically. It's just like, what's going to be on the test? That's like a question. Just tell us what's going to be on the test and let's
That makes
focus.
sense.
Yes.
With the way we're doing it.
What I'm hearing from employers is we're employing people, and you almost have, it's kind of like McDonald's now. When I worked at Wendy's, you actually needed to know how to make change.
Yes.
Now you just press the button says fries, the button says double burger, cheese, whatever. And if you make any changes, people don't know what to do with that. And then, of course, the thing spits out the exact change. So you don't even need to know how to count. But I hear employers saying, we are not educating a workforce that is ready to come into the workplace and actually contribute and to be innovative. So, Jennifer, what are you seeing in terms of how what we're doing with education right now is affecting students?
So what I see is students are being robbed of the joy of getting to have an actual lesson that is designed and taught by someone who has practiced their craft. They've removed the craft of teaching, the art and craft of teaching, because we all can think of, I think, an example of somebody who just really puts together a lesson in such a way, like those lessons you still remember, that drew you in, that got you excited. Kind of like a Miss Frizzle kind of moment where
I love Miss Frizzle.
thoroughly engaged, like she made you fall in love with whatever she was teaching. And they have literally written legislation to remove that part of it, saying that, oh, well, this is going to benefit teachers. So House Bill 1605, for example, is the high quality instructional materials bill. And the whole entire purpose that they're saying is that that bill is supposed to make it almost like a plug and play moment for teachers, where they just hand you a scripted curriculum and anybody should be able to teach it and get excellent results. And you don't, as a teacher, you don't have to worry about designing a lesson built for your students. That's why we need the craft of teaching. You just have to worry about how you say the words on the page in front of you. And so what you see in students is there isn't time now for them to be curious about something, ask a question, and as a class, maybe we explore that concept. There isn't time for curiosity. There is only time for, I need you to know how enough about one thing to be able to pass this test. And one of the first questions I asked when I got in the elementary setting was, this baby can't read. Why are we so worried about making sure they know 7 different ways to do this, but they can't even read? They don't understand. They don't have number sense. They don't have this. They don't have that. Are we not concerned about mastering each concept, each, each part of the lesson? Or is it just literally, we just need you to know enough to be able to go to the next thing, because we do not have time for you to master anything. We don't have time for you to explore, get excited about. That part has been legislated right out of education. And so you have students that are bored. They're spending more time on electronics. They're spending more time on a Chromebook, watching some videos that were developed by other people other than their teachers. Teachers have been kind of removed from that equation to the point where we can't get them excited about anything, because we have a script and there is no excitement built into those scripts. And so that's why students aren't curious. They aren't really excited about anything. They feel very much so like, okay, I came in, I read the objective on the board, I went through X, Y, and Z, I did my exit ticket, I knew just enough to do the exit ticket, and now we are done with that portion of that class, so let's go to the next thing. I mean, we've got kindergartners, first graders, second graders sitting in 90-minute blocks of reading and 90-minute blocks of math.
Double math.
That's ridiculous. That is not developmentally appropriate at all, not even close. And teachers have no say in making a classroom in which students can actually be excited about learning, because there's not time. And I never felt more rushed than when I was at the elementary level. It was always, we have to get to the next thing. We have to get to the next thing. They don't have time to get excited. They don't have time to be curious. They don't have time to ask questions about something that was maybe a little off topic, but just enough to make them excited about what you're actually trying to teach.
Yes,
Not
yes.
exciting. And you had a conversation with my 8-year-old, and you remember what those answers were like. He was bored. He's just talking about how, there's not really anything that he's super excited or interested in, because there's never time for anybody to be excited.
John, you want to add anything to that?
I want to throw in something. My wife is a PE teacher, has been for 22 years now. And one of the things she was dinged on.
My children's PE teacher.
That's true. One of the things she got dinged on a walkthrough, or when they were doing their basically teaching these high stakes that times when the administrator walks in, runs through a big old checklist, and they try to make it fair. It never quite works out the way you'd want. But the kids had done something, and it was like they were getting on to something else and really rolling with it. But she didn't go to her board and change the teaks that she was teaching, and that was a ding. It's like, oh, please, come on. So actually, that was something that showed up that was a problem. So it feeds into what you're saying perfectly, I think.
Teachers feeling very constrained.
Oh, yes.
So with the proposed changes with how public school is funded, I don't know if either one of you has any thoughts on what are you hearing the changes are, and what impact you think this will have. Is this a good thing? Because we shouldn't be afraid of change, but are these changes that are going to benefit our students? I know that for the school district that my children are in, Killeen ISD, our test scores are going down. The latest reports, parents should be very, very concerned at the alarming percentage of students who are simply not passing. And so there's always this debate. Is it the child's fault? Is it the parent's fault? Is it the teacher's fault? Those kind of things. And I'm like, wherever you want to lay the blame, bottom line is, if our children are failing, then this school to prison pipeline is getting wider and more boisterous. And of course, here in Bell County, we've built this fancy $100+ million prison complex. So on the one hand, I have heard that the reason some of these bills are being proposed, and in particular this school voucher bill, is really just running its way through the Texas House and Senate, especially since they primaried and voted out anybody who would oppose this bill, at least on the Republican side. And right now, the Republicans pretty much have a supermajority to do whatever they want to, House, Senate, and then of course they have the governorship as well. So the reason that supposedly these changes are being introduced is because public schools are failing. But my question is, who has been making the rules that the public schools have been operating under? Because I'm hearing from teachers, you guys almost have no power anymore in terms of how you teach, what you do. Is it just the children's fault? And how does now funding vouchers for private schools help to address that issue? So what are your thoughts on this? I'll start with you, Jennifer.
I have so many thoughts. I'm about to explode over here. So
go ahead, share them.
First and foremost, we have to go back to COVID, and I hate that we still have to go back to COVID. But when education got flipped upside down, within those first few months, teachers were seen as heroes. Like, oh my gosh, public educators are the best. They're amazing. Thank you so much for taking an entire educational system and flipping it upside down overnight, teaching from your homes, doing all this. And it was cute and wonderful, and everybody thought we were great until people started, missing work and got frustrated financially. And then that's when I believe Republicans really started to see an opportunity, because vouchers aren't new. It's not some brand new concept. They've been trying to figure ways to get the voucher system going, and they really needed to be able to get public support for that, or what they feel like is public support. So now it's, well, teachers are the reason why everyone has to stay home and can't make money. Teachers refuse to go back to work. That's why you're losing your jobs. That's why you can't feed your family, because teachers refuse to go back to work. And so all of a sudden, everyone's like, wait, teachers aren't the reason why I can't go back to work. And that's why we're struggling financially. It's because of those lazy teachers. And that's suddenly when all of a sudden public educators are lazy. Public educators aren't doing anything. So now you've got people who are struggling financially and they're angry. So now they're going to criticize everything that they see happening in the classes via Zoom. They're going to start going into the Schoology folders and online platforms and saying, well, what's being taught in here anyway? What are you even doing? And then they're going to notice, hey, my kid's not really even that engaged, or I'm noticing they got a lot of videos up, but they're not really doing anything hands-on. And so now you start to see the seeds of, well, maybe public schools aren't that great. And my kid's not really learning anything. And so I got so many emails from parents saying, we're just going to opt out. We don't have time. A lot of parents felt like because we were online, suddenly we were optional. But then as soon as everyone returned back in person, now you see, well, my kid didn't learn anything during the pandemic. My kid's missing some basic foundational skills. My child can't read. My child can't do this. And I will say this, and this is going to be a harsh, controversial truth, but if your child makes it to being a senior in high school and they can't read, you were the only consistent thing in their life. It wasn't all of their teachers from kindergarten to their senior year. You were their parent all of those years. So you cannot say one teacher is at fault for your child being unable to read. So I'm going to just put that out there, because no one wants to ever say that. No one wants to talk about the learning gaps didn't occur when kids were in school. The learning gaps occurred when the kids were at home with the people that they will have in their lives, hopefully forever. So maybe don't place all the blame on the people that you emailed and said it was optional. You didn't want to take your child to tutoring. You didn't want to support education by helping with homework. You didn't want to do some of the things that would have benefited your child greatly. So there is some blame to go elsewhere that's not in a teacher's lap. But then we also start to see legislation come out about, well, how are you teaching history? Suddenly we're very concerned with how history is being taught. Suddenly we're very, very concerned with what books are in classrooms. There's suddenly a lot of concern about what's happening, but we also aren't talking about the fact that the standards for the STAR test are subjective. They move that target every single time. You can make any child seem like they're failing. You can make that data say whatever you want it to say, depending on how you choose to move the target. And we all can at least somewhat acknowledge that the STAR test is not written appropriate to each grade level in which it's testing. A third grade STAR test really is more of an 8th grade reading level. As somebody who spent 2 years as an interventionist helping students who failed the STAR test, that was my entire job. When we're going through those practice questions, they are built to be intentionally misleading. They're built to have intentionally very confusing language. We are teaching children how to identify booby traps in math problems. Yep. We're having to teach them how to watch out for the problems that are going to get them. We're actively building a hostile test and then moving the target up and down and all around. When they started actually doing really well, when public school students actually started really doing well on the STAR, we had more students hitting meets. All of a sudden they're like, oh no, and they moved the bar up. They moved it away so that, look at them, they're all failing now. That's a shame. And teachers never know where the target is until after the test is taken.
Wow.
So there's so much that's built in to make it look like we're failing, make it look like teachers aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. You can easily say, oh, well, it was supposed to be, you're supposed to get 100 out of 100. And so teachers work towards that target and they're trying so hard to make sure everything is taught. And then retrospectively, when the graders are looking at the test and when, TEA is looking at the scores, and they're like, you know what? It should have been 100 or 150 out of 150. So they just got 100, but it was actually out of 150. So they're not doing so great. But you moved that bar after the test was taken. You made decisions about what you were looking for after you saw what students were doing.
Wow.
So that's incredibly problematic. The STAR test is not written for the grade level that it's actually being administered to. Teachers are confused on it. Teachers are trying to talk to each other in the hall saying, "Can you explain this problem to me? I don't understand it," but it's for a third grader.
So how do vouchers, how does that help? What is the argument? Yeah, John, you want to say anything, add anything to what Jennifer was saying? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you have any take on this whole voucher situation?
It's covered a lot of ground, a lot of good ground right there. As far as the vouchers go, on the surface, I looked through it today, tried to make heads and tails of it, and it sounds fairly benign, fairly good. 85% of what they put to the public schools, they'll allow that to go into these vouchers to private schools. I'm not sure where charters actually fit in there, but I'm sure it's something along the lines of the idea that parents have a responsibility is good. Teachers have a responsibility. Administrators have a responsibility. But your point about the legislation coming in and how TEA would move the goalposts.
And TEA is Texas Education Agency?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And are those educators or are those just political appointees?
I will say that Mike Morath, sorry, I have to say this. Mike Morath has never taught in a public school. The head of TEA, the one in charge of all of the public schools, has never actually taught in a public school. He taught for 3 years at a private school. That man has no
3-year enroll. Yeah. Okay. That's how we get our administrators. 3 years, administrator. They check off the box of being a classroom teacher and administration. That's their goal. That's what they're going for. So at least they have experience in there, but
it's not real experience.
Okay. Some of them do great. Some of them make it, and what they want to be as an administrator. That's fine. I'm not sure how you'd find administrators if they weren't focused on that, but still.
So your take on the vouchers, you were
the vouchers, yes.
Yeah.
Seemed like a good idea to start off with. My concern in the back of my mind is, okay, once we get a voucher system in place, then it gets tweaked year after year after year. Even at 85% of what we pay a public school to educate a child, I have a concern where a lot of I see these private schools going on to, they're pulpit driven. I'm not sure I like the way and the almost monolithic way the pulpits drive this sort of thing. And I know a lot of churches are there to see how much money they can make. I am very concerned that the pulpit would drive parents to put their students in their school where they could blow up the class sizes, they could drop standards because they're not having to hire qualified teachers even.
Yeah, they don't have the same accountability, private schools, as public schools do.
You mess up with that school, you get cast out of the church, you get cast out of the school, because you were I don't know, you pulled out a cell phone, whatever, some minor thing that the public school has to just keep dealing with and keep dealing with and keep dealing with. Educators in the public school system right now, I just was hearing some stories today about how they're afraid to call parents. There's parents who will just come back at you and you're trying to take care of this kid and 20 other children in the classroom, and you try to get some discipline going and try to work up the rubric. You talk to the child, you counsel the child, you eventually contact the parent before you write the child up. But sometimes the child's just blowing up in your classroom all the time. And if the parent comes off with a good offense, whenever you're trying to get some control, it can be very disheartening.
Or the parent turns to social media and blows it up that way, so that
certainly do that.
A problem for the teacher.
So what exactly is the school voucher proposal? Jennifer, can you fill us in on that?
So the way that it's worded now, because there is the Senate bill version that over 100 people testified in person about, and it was passed through very swiftly,
Yep.
with no changes to it, even though many were proposed. But essentially, what they're looking at, they're calling it an education savings account because apparently the word voucher is very offensive now. But the education savings account is such that when you look at any and all funding that could be available for a child's education, the education savings account would be supposedly managed by the state, because we know that Texas is great about managing money. It would be managed by the state, and a family would have to apply for it, and they would be offered roughly $10,000 for their student to attend a private institution of their choosing, as long as it is one of the approved private schools. So it does have to be approved by the state. So the reason why some people are calling this a vendor bill is, and homeschoolers were included in this initially at $2,000.
Yeah.
But if you have a student with special needs, if they're going to a private school, that would add an additional 1,500 onto the 10,000. And for homeschoolers, they would get an extra 500. But the way that it's being couched is that, the average public school student gets $6,160 or so dollars per student as your basic allotment, meaning they're not special ed, they're not dyslexic, they're not career and technical they just basic child. They would get that, $6,160. Most students don't get just $6,160. They do get significantly more. Like I said, there are so many factors that could add on to how much each student gets, that ultimately the price of educating children in Texas costs a lot more than $6,160, and each program does draw in more. So they're trying to say that 10,000 is comparable to how much the average student in Texas would actually receive. But the vendor part of this comes in when they will have a predetermined list of vendors and educational materials that homeschool parents are going to be able to choose from in order to be able to utilize a voucher. So then there would have to be some government oversight into what's being taught in a homeschooling setting. But also you have approved vendors and curriculum for, I believe they're trying to say 4 private schools, but I don't really think that's actually the case. But mostly we're looking at, they have a pre-approved list of vendors and curriculum that people will be able to choose from in order to educate their children. And that's where homeschoolers are getting angry about it, because you're not going to tell me what I can teach my child in my home.
Well, I thought the whole thing was parent choice was how it was being couched during the election period. So now they're taking away more of the parental choice, and it's really going to be the state, similar to the public schools, but more probably in a more parochial way, determining, making sure there's no wokeness and no DEI and no quote unquote CRT, as though we ever taught critical race theory.
Yeah.
But there's still no accountability as far as making sure that they're meeting certain testing standards. Now, I will say the House bill has an added part about private school students will have to have annual testing. But the difference is they have to have norm reference testing, not STAR testing. STAR testing is criterion rated testing, where you just have the bar here, you better meet it. Norm reference is referring to, how do you compare to other 3rd graders? How do you compare to other 4th graders nationwide? And most children look very successful when you do a norm reference testing. And norm reference testing looks at what's more developmentally appropriate for this age group to know. So of course, now when a year or 2 from now, looking at that data, they're going to say, see, private schools are all doing so much better. Those students are doing far better than public school students, because look at them. They're all in the 90th percentile. They're doing, and percentiles will come a lot more important. Whereas with public schools, they'll say, see, we have the bar up here and your child only got to here. That's why public schools are failing, without saying that this bar wasn't ever appropriate for a 3rd grader.
Not having taught in the school, I did homeschool my children for a while, and thank you, John, because he provided me with some electrical boards and some other stuff. And quite frankly, I learned to really appreciate teachers during the 4 to 5 years when I was homeschooling my children, because it does take a lot of effort and work to think creatively and think about how to engage kids and really help them. For me, I wanted my children to know how to learn and to be excited about learning, because what we know is change is constant. Careers that exist today didn't exist when I graduated from college, and I'm expecting the same will be true in another 10, 15 years. And so you have to learn to adapt and always be able to keep going. Like the technology we're even using right now did not exist just a few years ago. But as I'm looking at this whole issue of education, I think, and you all feel free to jump in and correct me if you say, I think you're going too far. I think there's something a lot more insidious going on here. And this is why I say that. Race, unfortunately, has always played a role in the United States of America from the very inception. From, you want to talk about Plymouth Rock, you want to talk about the race laws that started to be put into place in Virginia back in the 1600s, and so on and so forth. And we do know that when it comes to education, that education is not considered as something, it's not like freedom of speech or even the right to bear arms. It is not a fundamental right according to United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. We do know that there were laws in place that prevented Black people in particular from getting an education. You could be killed for learning how to read and write. I think there was a reason for that. We do know, if you've studied history, that over time, with the emancipation of slaves, with the Freedmen's Bureau, one of the things that's freed enslaved Africans really fought for was the right to education, access to education. They really pushed for this whole notion of public education, because to a large degree, even poor white people were not getting educated back then. Education was really the purview of the haves, the wealthier, class, if you will. And so you see this push for education, right? And then it's separate but equal, right? Yeah. And so we are going to, okay, yes, maybe we do have to educate you guys, but you can be over in that shack over there, and you cannot be over here that is better funded. So there's always been this tension and this fight about who has access to education, what quality of education they have, how education is funded across the nation. So if you live in a district that has a bigger, deeper tax base, a wealthier tax base, those schools are funded at a totally different level than if you are in a poorer, school district in terms of the tax base, right? So we see the inequalities with that. We know that with Brown v. Board of Education, now the Supreme Court says schools have to be desegregated, that there were cities, there were states that shut down education for a whole year. Like nobody, talk about splitting the baby in half. Yeah. Nobody gets educated because we are not going to let those Negroes or those spics or those, whatever the terms were for different people, be educated side by side with our children. And we weren't going to make it equal when it was separate anyway, right?
Right.
In the state of Texas, there were still schools that were being monitored in terms of following through on the mandates to desegregate schools as late as the 1990s. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, we had suburban flight. This is how we created suburbs. White flight. It's like, okay, you're forcing us to go to school with your kids, so tell you what, we're just going to move. And we're going to have all these restrictive covenants, so you people can't follow us over there and live next to us and then be able to attend our schools. The history of school vouchers, when I did my research, goes back even as far as 1955. Milton Friedman, who was an economist, was saying, hey, if we have school vouchers, it's going to improve education by improving market competition. So, now our kids are like this commodity. And I'm like, what is this purpose of education? If you do not have an educated citizenship, you have exactly what we have now. people who are so prone to disinformation and misinformation, they cannot tell the difference between a truth and a lie, and they're literally cutting off their own noses to spite their faces because they can't even synthesize the information they're receiving to make informed decisions. So we definitely had the Southern segregationist policies from the 1950s to the 60s. And what some states did was they used vouchers then to fund private schools, thus allowing white students to avoid going to integrated public schools. Now, some of those efforts were struck down as being unconstitutional. But starting in the 1990s, we started to see this voucher thing like rear its head again. So Milwaukee has a parental choice program supposedly focused on low-income families. And first it was we're serving low-income families so that these students have access to better education, but not addressing what is going on with our public schools and why can't we improve the schools for everybody, as opposed to saying a handful of people will get vouchers, but the vast majority are still left in these schools if you say they're failing. Then it was expanded in Milwaukee to include religious schools because this is a capitalist society and ultimately it comes down to the money. And yes, if churches and other religious organizations can tap into this tax base and siphon out resources without the same accountability as public schools, they serve themselves and maybe a handful of kids. Except what a lot of people are not paying attention to is public schools pretty much have to admit every child.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. On the day they come up, hey, I need to be in. Okay, yeah. Go to some classes. Here you go. Just like that. Well, yeah.
So I remember my son, my oldest son, did start off preschool at a school run by a church. And that was when I first noticed if a kid got into trouble in that private school and got kicked out, the other private schools did not admit that child. That child ended up at a public school that did not have the option of saying, we won't take your child in. So then in 1995, you had the Cleveland voucher program, supposedly again targeting low-income students, particularly those in failing schools. That was struck down because actually, in that school district, the Supreme Court in Zelman v. Simmons Harris in 2002 upheld the precedent for publicly funded vouchers for religious schools. Then you get to the Florida Opportunity Scholarship Program in 1999. Again, the idea is we care so much about these schools that are failing, but we won't do the things to improve those schools. We'll just do vouchers. Now, that one was struck down for violating the state's constitution. Then you had the Indiana Choice Scholarship Program in 2011. It served actually 35,000 students, but think of how many millions of students there actually are in Indiana. So again, why are we doing these carve out programs that serve a handful of kids, but not really addressing the issue for everybody? And then you've got the Arizona Empowerment Scholarship Program, and it goes on and on. Now, what are some of the results that they've seen? In some studies, depending on how you set up your study, anyone who's had to do some empirical research, they are showing slight gains in student achievement, especially for quote unquote minority and low income students. However, in some other places in Ohio, Indiana, and Louisiana, they found out that voucher recipients initially scored worse on standardized tests. The other thing that they've also noted is, first of all, the private schools don't have to admit your child if they don't want to. Second of all, you're not getting the free and reduced lunches and all of that. You do not have the IEPs, the supports that you need for students who may have any learning disabilities. You also have to figure out your own transportation to and from the schools, which most parents are not prepared necessarily to deal with.
Especially in the low income situation.
Especially in the low income situation. And then at the same time, you are actually pulling resources, funding out of the public schools for these private schools. So is this, in your opinion, a good thing for the state of Texas as
So
we are moving forward now?
looking at the vouchers, it would serve only 100,000 kids. There are 5.5 million students in public schools right now, but
Mhm.
100,000 kids get to have a coupon. And when we say low income, we're looking at, they've changed some of the wording. So now it's only 200% times the poverty level, which brings it down significantly because the
Okay.
Senate bill had 500%, which was
Mhm.
$160,000 for a family of four. And when we look at how much they're saying private schools only cost about $9,000. That is what they are saying as the justification. It's $10,000 for the voucher, but the average private school only costs 9,000. I don't know what private schools are talking about, but here in House District 55, because that's what I'm more familiar with, Central Texas Christian School, for example, their tuition for an elementary student is just over 10,000. A kindergarten elementary student, one through first through fifth grade, is almost at 11,250 or so. But there's an $800 enrollment fee. There's a $50 application fee. There's another few $100 some sort of fee that comes on annually. If your child wants to play athletics, that's a little bit more. They do provide transportation, but that's also a few $100s. So quickly you've gotten up to almost $15,000 but you have that $10,000 voucher. So when you talk about, can the average person that's living within the realm of the poverty line actually afford to do that? No, because they're still going to have to pay a few thousand in advance. And the way that the bill is worded, it's very confusing. It's almost like a star test. It says that it would pay the money, it would apply the money after the first semester after the application was submitted, which potentially means that, say you didn't get an application in until fall or maybe late summer, we're looking at the application of those funds in spring. So some families may have to pay for that first semester out of pocket. Now, how many low income families are going to be able to do that with the idea that, hey, I'm going to get this money for the spring?
Mhm.
That's not feasible. When we look at a school like Holy Trinity, their flat tuition is $12,334. That was on their website today. And they have several $100s in fees again. So you have to look at, yeah, you could say that they're going to use the voucher for educational purposes, but then they could also use it for transportation, which takes away from the tuition and fees because almost every private school makes that a separate fee. They still have to pay application fees. They still have to pay enrollment fees. If you have multiple children, you're looking at other fees associated with that. And there's a tier system that's built in the House Bill 3. That's the House version of the voucher bill. Senate Bill 2 was the Senate version that passed through, again with no accountability, nothing like that. The House bill tried to kind of tackle some of it by saying, okay, well, they at least have to take a test. Bare minimum, they're going to have to take a test every year. And they have different levels of who eventually gets to qualify for potentially participating in the program. And it all keeps going back to, but at the end of the day, public schools are going to pick up anybody and everybody who somehow doesn't prove themselves worthy of continuing to have a voucher.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, public schools still have to pick up everybody. We have to be the catch-all for anybody, everybody. If you get rejected from private school, guess what? You're going to go to that public school.
So what is there any parallel conversation on how we improve public schools? And for our listeners, what if anything should people be doing, should parents be doing, for those who are concerned, community members who are saying we want well-educated young people because they're the ones who are going to take care of us, they're the ones who can work and pay into Social Security if that program is still going to be around. So what is it that people should take away, and what should they be doing at this time? Because it just seems like there's a lot of hand wringing, there's a lot of oh my god, and of course there are people who are just excited, don't know exactly why they're excited, but they're excited nonetheless. So what words would you like to share, John or Jennifer, whoever would like to go first?
I was hoping you would. You are so well grounded in the ins and outs of this. I just worry about if we take it out of that local controlled public school, as flawed as I can punch holes in it all day. If we move it into this voucher system, the tweaks that will come later on and the flow of students into that system will pick up a lot, especially if, like we say, we go with faith-based items and the whole social aspect of that. The students we pushed into that, good, bad, or indifferent testing. Okay, that part you mentioned about the different ways that would be tested, that's huge. They may be able to drive the kids to pass those tests because the parents would be expected socially to ensure their students did better. It might bring more engagement there. Can we bring that to the school instead? Can we bring it to the public school where everyone's going to benefit? The students being pressured to, or the parents being pressured to read to their kids, as is very important for the kids, especially in the younger ages, to be actually read to. That's what I'd like to see. If we could take what we can use, what that will probably do, and just allow the public schools to somehow work with that. The lawyers that come after the public schools, because like you're saying, they take everybody, and you can't move out somebody, but the lawyers can start getting involved, and all of a sudden, all our public education money starts feeding that beast. The folks driving, they want their student to get particular things, and sometimes it's very unfair. The bully sometimes gets to stay where the victim moves on, and I hate to see that sort of thing happen, especially in the vouchers. The money, as you mentioned, we have this capitalist society that we are benefiting from, but these social programs such as schools, it's a tricky mix. And if
I really think this whole system, as far as I'm concerned, it is about making this nation a white nation again. It is about making sure that our children are not properly educated.
Yes.
They don't have the history, because I'm not looking at these things as silos. It's the school vouchers, it's the anti-CRT bill, it's the attack on teachers.
Okay, you're right. Yeah.
School bans. It's all of those pieces. We basically want to raise children, white kids, in these cults. Mm-hmm. We do want to marginalize everybody else. Yep. And we want to, as some of Trump's appointees have said, all the positions should really be filled by white men, because those are the only people who are competent. And there's no ever questioning a white man's competency, but for everybody else, you must be a quote unquote DEI hire. I'm going to say it on air. Trump is the ultimate quote unquote, in the way they characterize DEI. He is the ultimate DEI hire because he has zero qualifications to be in the position that he's in, which is not at all what diversity, equity, and inclusion is about. But I think this is really about making this a white nationalistic society, and there's this mentality in terms of what children should learn, and the education, and it's got to be a certain form of Christianity. Jennifer, we have about 60 seconds left. What would you like to add, or any party?
I will say this: the thing that I've noticed for all of these proponents of parent choice is that nobody is trying to say what we can get right in public education. Nobody's proposing any useful solution. And what we're saying is that we want public education to be a positive choice, but the only way that's going to happen is if it's fully funded. We've never seen public education in Texas actually be funded to the extent that it needs to be. And it's kind of like saying, okay, I know if I'm going to drive across the state, it'll take me 2 tanks of gas. Each one is $45 each. And then someone saying, okay, well, I'm only going to give you $45, but you better make it all the way across the state. That is what public education funding has been like. They're mocking us for not making it all across the state with $45 worth of gas when we actually need 90.
Nice. Well, so for all our listeners, get educated. Don't get intimidated about this information. Do not bury your head in the sand. Speak up. Vote for people who actually care about educating all of our youth and not just some. and understand that the power lies within us as long as we exercise it. But if we don't, we will allow the bullies to run roughshod, and we're all going to suffer as a result. So thank you, John, for joining me, and thank you so much, Jennifer. We look forward to your comments, questions, and anything else you would like to share on our YouTube channel. Thank you all for watching today.